Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited this morning to introduce Kate Roberts. This is session 1, workshop 1, and Kate's going to be talking to us today about balancing whole class text with choice, reading in the purposeful, joyful classroom. Kate is a member of the Educator Collaborative Network. She's a national literacy consultant, top-selling author, and a popular keynote speaker. Many of us know her from her work at the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project, where she was a lead staff developer for 8 years. I know she taught us so much during those times. Her work with students across the country had led her belief that all kids can be insightful academic thinkers when the work is demystified, broken down, and made engaging. And every time I watch you, Kate, you also make it really fun with kids. You can learn more about Kate's work as well as access her videos and other resources at kateandmaggie.com. We hope you join the conversation today on Twitter. You can do that by just adding the hashtag the #EdCollabGathering, #1, because this is workshop 1. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions and keep the conversation going. So at that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kate.
Awesome. Hi, everybody on the internet. This is always a somewhat odd transition to get used to be talking into the void and just looking at my face. I would prefer to be looking at all of yours. But we soldier on. And I'm excited about this topic. I'm passionate about this topic. I'm also nervous and worried about this topic because what we're going to be tackling today is wrestling with, looking at, examining our relationship to the whole class novel. And by that I mean what it means to have kids all be reading the same text with the same text in their hand day after day. And for most of us, we probably fall into one of a few different camps or lean towards one of a few camps. Some of you might teach primarily with whole class texts. And in fact, that might be for I know for many teachers that I work with, particularly in high school and in middle school, it's almost odd to label it whole class novel teaching because it's just teaching. Like when I grew up, that's what my class was like, right? Like we studied a book for weeks at a time with a teacher who knew the book really, really well and was guiding us through the work, through the book, page by page sometimes, right? And when I studied teaching, I promise we'll get to content, but I have to do a little autobiography stuff to set the stage of sort of where I'm coming from and where my pedagogical notions and beliefs have stayed the same and evolved over time. When I learned how to teach, I went to Teachers College, but it wasn't at the Reading and Writing Project, and I studied under brilliant professors in the English education department who taught me how to teach whole class novels. So I grew up with whole class novels, and then I learned how to teach using whole class novels with kids. Not only that, but I am the child of English professors. And so I grew up watching my dad teach, certainly using whole class novels and lecturing on them, right? Like hour-long lectures about the text. So some of you may be in that situation, either in your past or in your present methodologies. Some of you might be where I am sort of more now, or where I came to, which is what we might call like a reader's workshop philosophy and methodology. Where instead of one text that we're reading all together and that's the primary driver of our curriculum, instead the kids are choosing books, and I as the teacher am the person who's showing them, modeling, coaching them in ways to read any book more powerfully, and that they ostensibly go apply into that book on their own, becoming stronger, more independent readers. And here's the thing. I came from a whole class novel mindset. It was all I ever knew. And when I first got a job in Brooklyn, New York, I imagined I was going to be a high school English teacher. I thought I was going to teach seniors. In my inexperienced mind, I thought we were going to be talking about philosophy. Like I was going to be like existentialism. Let's bring out the Camus, right? I was all about it. And there was a hiring freeze the year that I graduated with my teaching degree. And so I couldn't get a job. There were like no jobs. So I looked and looked and looked, and things were getting pretty crunch time. And down the street from me was a middle school that was hiring, which to my weird snobby mind felt like death. But I needed a job, and I got a job, and the woman who hired me, the brilliant Melanie Woods, asked me, "Do you know TC?" Meaning Teachers College. And what she meant was, "Do you know Teachers College, the Reading and Writing Projects work, aka do you know Reading Workshop?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know TC. I went there, so I know how to get the cafeteria. I know how to," right? So we had this total misunderstanding. I said, "Yes, I know TC." She was basically like, "You're hired." I walked into my classroom, and there were baskets of books. And I remember my first instinct was, I said, "Hey, this is great, but can you just like move all these books out of the way? Because this is like a lot of clutter in the room." So I was pretty resistant to Reader's Workshop at first. And I think I had some decent reasons for being resistant. I didn't know how to get it going productively. I didn't understand the philosophies behind it. And I didn't have any experience in learning this way. Obviously, I became a true believer. What I found in my teaching experience was that I was able to get my kids to read in Reader's Workshop. Because the dirty little secret for me in my schooling when I was in high school is that while we did whole class novels all the time, I really didn't read a book until my senior year. And even then, it was like a couple of them. I learned how to skim books. I learned how to fake my reading. I learned how to answer questions that the teacher asked me without having read the book. And I found that with my kids, it was also my students, when I got into the classroom, it was also a real challenge to get true reading happening. And I felt like I was able to do that with Reader's Workshop. I felt like I was able to get kids to read. And then almost more importantly, I felt like I was able to help them grow in their reading. Like I saw my kids get better as readers in my care. Like they left me knowing how to read books more independently and more powerfully than when they came to me. So I say all of that because probably you, as I, come from a pedagogical history, right? Like we have a story, we have a set of belief systems that either stayed the same or changed over time. And I think sometimes we can become overly, I don't know what the word is, dogmatic, dependent on those pedagogies. For example, in Reader's Workshop, what I found for myself and my colleagues is that it became almost like a bad thing to suggest teaching a whole class novel. In other words, I went from thinking that's the only way to teach in the world to fundamentally believing that whole class novels, this is a light touch. I'm going to be dramatic now because why not? It's the internet. I can't see reactions anyway. But I sometimes would lean into this belief that whole class novels were almost like bad for kids, or there was this tone or this vibe that teaching a whole class text was bad for kids. And there were real reasons for this feeling, and reasons that I actually still believe are kind of true. For example, whole class novels, when all kids are in one text, create inherent inequity in the classroom. You know, if a kid can read that book, they're good, right? If a kid can read the whole class novel independently with strength, then they are going to be so much better off than the kids in my class that are not able to read the whole class novel with strength. For the kids who found it easy to read these books, it was going to be easy, the class. The grades they were getting were going to be simple to get. So I had a problem ultimately with whole class text because of the text difficulty. The other reason why, and sometimes I say like when good whole class novels go bad, that whole class novels felt problematic for me ultimately was the amount of time that we spend in them typically. I know in my school when I was growing up, we would spend like 8-10 weeks in a novel. And the result of that primarily, like predominantly, is that we started to really not like those books. There were exceptions, but I have to say that the 8 weeks I spent in Ethan Frome, I did not like Ethan Frome, and in fact, I would have said to this day that I don't like Ethan Frome, except that I actually picked it up recently and started reading it, and I was like, damn, that's beautiful. But I didn't have a chance to access that beauty because I was being sort of pummeled with the text at the time. So one problematic thing about whole class novels is text difficulty. That's been talked about a lot in the world. Another problem with whole class novels is the time we spend in them that we, I've heard someone say sometimes it feels like you're torturing the life out of the book. The third difficulty or issue that comes up with whole class novels is this idea of transfer. So I could get down with getting in a book that's a struggle for us, right? And spending forever on it. I could get down with that. If at the end of that 8 weeks, that 10 weeks, that 6 weeks, that 5 weeks, I could look at my class and say, you know, the experience we just had with of Mice and Men, it made my kids better. They are heading into the next book they read stronger, more powerful, more independent, more sophisticated as readers. But that's not exactly what I have found happens. Then instead, when we're in a kind of traditional whole class novel structure, what winds up happening often, not for every kid, but often, is that kids stay the same. So our strong readers stay strong. Our kids who are having a little more trouble with the text we're throwing at them, or who don't self-identify as readers, are continuing to have that identity and to have those struggles or obstacles in their way. And we're not necessarily doing what we need to do to mitigate that. So I became kind of a true believer in Reader's Workshop, partly because I saw that it was working, and secondly, because it really started to expose or highlight for me some of the real troubles, I think, with whole class novel teaching in that sort of traditional way. So the thing is, though, that as I became a true believer, as I kind of drank the Kool-Aid of Reader's Workshop, I missed them. I'm gonna say it. I missed them so much that actually in my 8th grade class, I wound up sneaking in a Romeo and Juliet unit at least once a year. And over time, I started tinkering with how to make that unit a little bit better. I missed my whole class novels, and I think there were some really good reasons for why I missed them. So first of all, just check in with yourself now. I know we can't communicate with each other, but you know, I tell that story not just so that you can hear more about me, but to kind of get a sense of, like, where are you in this? Are you someone who is a whole class novel teacher? And if so, did the problems I just bring up, do they resonate for you, or do they not feel like issues in your classroom? If you're a full-on Reader's Workshop person, have you ever missed the feeling of being in a whole class text? Or are you someone like me very recently that's been trying to, like, match them together? Because whole class novels, you know, it's one of those things, we've been doing them since, you know, the beginning of time because they have value. Like reading a text in a community of people, a whole class, led or facilitated by someone who knows that text really deeply and really well, it can build an incredible sense of community in the classroom. One story that I have from my teaching is that I taught Romeo and Juliet every year with my 8th graders. And, you know, I remember the day that I had this group of boys coming into my room 6th period after lunch, and they were like debating, like passionately, which of them was the bigger Romeo and which of them was the bigger Mercutio. That was something that I couldn't achieve in the same ways in a pure Reader's Workshop classroom. So they can build community. The other thing that whole class novels give us is, you know, the thing that I named as a con, I believe, can also be a strength. They're generally hard, complex texts. They're texts that need a person who knows them well sometimes to help you through them. So they can help kids to reach to higher levels of complexity and sophistication in their thinking. So I think they can be good because of community. I think they can be good because of their complexity. And I think the other reason why they can be powerful tools or a powerful method is because they're the future for a lot of kids, right? Like, I was an 8th grade teacher, and at the time, the high schools that my kids were going to were not going to be doing Reader's Workshop anymore. The kids weren't going to choose their books. They were going to be given the book. It was going to be a whole class novel chosen by the teacher, and they were going to be asked to contend with it. And if you're a high school teacher, like the high schools I work with now, who've adopted a kind of more Reader's Workshop structure, you know, by the time they get to college, they will choose their courses, but then they'll be given the books that they're reading most of the time. So there's a way that it doesn't make sense if we're in grades that are leading kids towards this model of teaching, it would behoove us and behoove them to maybe teach them to do it in some more powerful, more effective, more engaged ways. So what this session is intending to do is to ask this question. It's a question that has been plaguing me, guiding me, keeping me a little bit up at night, although my kids do a pretty good job of that on their own. This question: what would it mean to teach a whole class novel in a way that still lives up to and embraces the philosophies and structures of Reader's Workshop, which I believe in deeply in my bones? Okay, so what I want to do for the next half hour or so is to take you through a loose framework of one answer to that question. I think there are probably multiple answers to that question, and there are a couple other texts out there that look at working with whole class novels, and I'm really excited to join that conversation. Here's my framework. The first thing that I've been working on lately in terms of helping mash these two methodologies or pedagogies together is that if we want kids to use whole class novels to become better readers, not just to get to know the books they're holding, then we have to get to know our readers really deeply and to shape all of our choices around that. For example, the first thing, I'm going to be toggling through some slides awkwardly now. This is where if we were in person together, I would have you turn and talk, everybody. The first thing is that we get to know our readers. There we go. Hey, there we go. Okay, so we're going to get to know our readers, and the first way that we want to get to know them to make this work more effective is that we want to get to know what skills that they most need work around. What I remember from my whole class novel teaching is that what we did was everything in the novels we read when I was growing up. We did every single reading skill almost every day, right? Like one day we would work on recall stuff, like the important things that happened in the chapter. Then we would move on to author's craft and looking at why the author used this image in the chapter. Then we would also think about how this relates to the theme. We would also look at character work, right? It would all just be kind of like randomly mashed up together every day. And the teacher would primarily ask questions that we would try to answer. And so instead, one thing that I'm suggesting is that if we want to adopt a whole class novel methodology that keeps kids at the center, that we're going to have to choose what skill or skills are going to be our main focal point. Now, this does not mean I'm not going to cover some of the other skills, but that there's a skill that I'm going to really teach. And to me, I think that's an important distinction. Like, teaching signifies something to me. Like, teaching is wicked hard. It means I have to repeat myself over and over again, right? Because I'm constantly humbled by the amount of time and repetition it takes for human beings to learn a new skill. Like, not just kids, me. It is so hard to learn how to use a new muscle that you didn't have before. So when I say I'm going to teach this skill in this unit, that means I'm saying I'm going to repeat myself multiple times. It's going to be something that we work on over and over and over and over again until we get better at it independently. The second thing that teaching means to me is that we have like methods, right? Like, I'm not just telling kids to do this skill, but I'm like demonstrating for them how you would do this skill and then allowing them to go try it. Or I'm doing some guided practice and coaching so the kids are trying things and then trying the next step and trying the next step with me, kind of giving them tips along the way. The other thing that teaching signifies to me is the oft-used and perhaps ruined word differentiation. That if I'm teaching something, I know that in a group of kids, in a group of people, there are going to be some who take to it really quickly and need enrichment. There are some who are going to need just more of that work. It's right in their zone. That's awesome. And there are some for whom that skill isn't going to be perfect and they're going to need more supportive work to help them get to that place, even if we're doing the same thing all together. So to get to know our readers, we're going to choose a skills focus and we're going to gather strategies for that skill. I think about it like I took before I left New York City for Connecticut, where we live now, Maggie and I took a pizza making class, specifically a gluten-free pizza making class, which I know feels like an oxymoron, but we did it and it was pretty tasty. And, you know, it struck me that in that class, the teacher didn't talk to us about pizza, right? The teacher didn't ask us questions about pizza and then have us answer it. Like, she didn't say, so what's the main ingredient in a pizza? Anyone? And then wait for someone to raise their hand, call on them. They say like cheese. And then the teacher's like, no, that's not exactly it, right? She didn't do that kind of like back and forth questioning that I know I find myself falling into so often. She didn't give us a handout on facts about pizza and say, study this, there's going to be a quiz. Because the fact is that what she wanted is that she wanted us to become better pizza makers, not more knowledgeable about pizza. And so she demonstrated, how do you roll the dough? She demonstrated at what ratio do you put sauce to cheese? I mean, the answer to that obviously is lots of both, but whatever. She had us practice right away and then came around and gave us feedback immediately, not in like 2 weeks after we handed her our pizza quiz, right? And so this is the kind of spirit that I think we can bring to our work with whole class novels, really our work in any mode of teaching or reading. That we can think of our kids, we can maybe collect some data, and we'll talk about that in a second, and we can ask ourselves, what are the skills that my kids need the most work in independently? They're going to help them be the strongest readers independently. And we can name that as kind of a skills focus for that unit. That picture is my son learning how to read. So for example, I give this list because it's my favorite list. You know, one of the things that really helped me to think about reading in general and teaching specifically is that while I don't want this to stand up in some weird data court or some, you know, I don't want to be called to the judge's bench to answer for this list. It is really helpful for me as a teacher if I can think of reading skills as being on a kind of hierarchy. That it helps me to think, boy, it's going to make my kids better as reader if first they're really solid in monitoring for sense. Like they understand, if they understand the text, they pay attention where they're confused, and they have ways to repair that confusion along the way. Or, and then next, right, that there's a sense of having a wide variety of fluency skills, etc. And you see that the skills tend to get increasingly complicated as they go up the hierarchy, say, or down the hierarchy in this list. That feels really important because it's the way I can set a goal that feels worth focusing on, as opposed to thinking that I have to teach all of the skills all of the time as readers. I may in one unit teach all of the skills to some degree. Like I might cover, there might be an analyze and craft lesson in this unit, but I am not going to worry about the skills that I cover. I'm going to worry about the skills focus for my unit. So this is typically a place where I want to check in and see, does this feel like, yeah, we're cooking with gas, this makes sense? That the first thing I'm going to do really in any unit, but certainly in a whole class novel unit, is to take my Outsiders novel, my Outsiders book that I want to teach or that I have been teaching for many, many years. And I'm going to look at my kids in front of me and I'm going to say, what would be a good skills focus for them that might make them more powerful readers when they leave the study of this book? So I look at my kids. I also, of course, look at my novel that I'm thinking about reading with them. And I want to make sure that that novel is going to do some of the work of the unit well. So, for example, if I take The Outsiders, which I just threw out there, The Outsiders is pretty good for character. It's good for pretty, I mean, it's good for pretty intro character work, right? If you know that book, there's not like, it's not super complicated. In fact, it sort of tells you a lot. Like you have to infer, there's lots of connections to make. I'm not knocking The Outsiders. Please don't send me angry emails. I love The Outsiders, Pony Boy for life. But they tell you a lot of time what those characters are feeling or what personality they are, right? Like the whole like first chapter basically is like, Pony Boy is this way and this is how it enacts in his life. So, you know, I don't know that I'm going to use The Outsiders for like a deep, like complex sense of character. I don't know that I'm going to use the Outsiders for analyzing author's craft, if that's my skills focus. But like a beginning character work, even some theme work, like that feels like a really, really strong skills focus for that unit. Okay, so if we want to teach our kids to become better readers and we are craving a whole class community text to do that around, the first thing we're going to have to do is to make sure that we narrow our focus and say, you know what, we're going to do a lot of things in this chunk of time that we're in this book together. I want to give you a lot of things to practice and encounter, but there is 1 or 2 or 3 things that I'm like expecting that we are going to get our arms wrapped around and get better at. That like at the end of this time, you can go off into your next book and be like, I'm better at interpreting theme or reading fluently or what have you. Okay, so that's one way. The other way that we want to get to know our readers is to know them by choosing the right book. Now, if you're a Reader's Workshop person, you probably have a good sense of this in the sense that when we do read aloud, right, which is in Reader's Workshop, our whole class text, we are reading a book together. It's just that I'm doing a lot of the reading aloud for the kids. The kids don't have the text. They aren't really reading that independently on their own. And usually we're really striving to choose a book and read aloud that the kids respond to. Although I find the same issues come up with book choice in Reader's Workshop as in a whole class novel unit. And it's this, that sometimes, like as the year starts or the unit begins, you know, we kind of think about what book we're going to use, if we think about it at all. And we can make that decision based on a couple very, I think, practical things. The first thing sometimes, or a factor I think we put into choosing a whole class novel, one is that we've always taught it. Right? So I was in a Reader's Workshop classroom recently where they were doing Because of Winn-Dixie. Great book, great choice. But, you know, they noticed that their kids weren't that into it. And you know, they thought about changing it the next year. But, like, it felt really scary because it was like, but we've always taught this. Or I have another example. I worked with a district that I love. The teachers are brilliant. You know, the kids are great. Like, this is a beautiful, inspiring place. But they had gotten themselves into the situation where they, no joke, 3 years in a row, their kids were being asked to read a John Steinbeck novel for like weeks. Like, I love John Steinbeck. I'm down with John Steinbeck, but like that's too much John Steinbeck, right? So the reason why is that, well, it's just always been done this way. And so we want to pull away from choosing books just because they're the ones that have always been here in our building. It's the legacy of units past. That might be a reason to choose a book, but probably we're going to want to think about some other factors for our kids when we're choosing a whole class text that we're going to spend a good chunk of time on. First, we want to think about difficulty. And while this may not be a book that every kid can read with strength, and hopefully we'll get to that in this presentation, or I'll divert you to some resources that can address that. It's not that every kid can read this book with strength, but it isn't bananas difficult for a lot of the kids in my class. And I think we know the feeling of, you know, we know the feeling like when I got to college and someone gave me Ulysses by James Joyce for the first time, I couldn't get through a clause without having to stop and be like, what did I just read? And I think that we want to be really aware of that. I worked in a school where social studies was reading a book, which was fantastic, right? The social studies teacher was really adopting literacy and trying to get into a text together. And they were reading My Brother Sam is Dead. And I was working with a boy who the teacher was saying was having trouble with the text. And so I just had him read a little bit aloud to me and tell me what he had just read. And same thing, that book to him felt like Ulysses did to me when I was in college. He could not get through a clause and tell me what he had just read. I would argue that choosing a book that is profoundly difficult for our kids and expecting them to read it on their own without support for how to tackle tough text is somewhat unethical. That we have to choose books that, even if it's hard, even if it's a challenge, it doesn't feel like it's impossible. We don't give kids text that they have to cope with. We give kids text that they can try to read. So one, we do want to be aware of difficulty. When we're choosing a whole class text, whether it's read aloud or a whole class novel, we also want to obviously think about interest. And one really great place I'm working with in Connecticut here did this great thing where they're going to every year give polls to the kid, to have the kids choose what some of their whole class novels are for the next year before they do ordering, so that they can order thoughtfully and think about the books that the kids really want to read. Inside of that choice, I think we have to think about identity when we're choosing books. And that it is so easy when we get into higher level texts to all of a sudden find ourselves in a situation where every book we're reading with kids are written by the same type of person, by the same identity, often white, cisgendered, middle-class men. And while those books have value and we want them in our class, for sure, they're a part of a kind of legacy of reading. I think one of the things that I have to do continually as an educator is to humble myself to understand that I have drank that Kool-Aid, right, of just assuming that those are the books that are worth reading. And I can struggle against pushing myself to make sure that many identities are represented in the books I choose. For many, many reasons. I think Dr. Reese's keynote is a great example of that. That takes work, and it takes effort, and it takes reflection, and it takes pushing and getting out of our comfort zones. But we, I think, have to do it, partly because our kids need to see themselves in books. You know, I never read a book that had a character like me in it until I started reading some tragic plays with gay characters in them, where the gay characters were either horribly demented or died in the end. And it does something to you as a young person to not see that. And I know many, many people share my story. Also, as Dr. Reese mentioned at the end of her keynote, it is not just for the identities that are not represented well in books, but that we want to make sure that the kids who belong to some of the privileged identities also understand that theirs is not the only story out there. So we choose a book thoughtfully for our kids, that we're thinking about difficulty, we're thinking about interest, we're thinking about diversity. And then if we want our unit to go well, the other thing that I think we need to really tackle that is incredibly painful, and so I want to, if you teach whole class novels, steel yourself, because this is the part that's the hardest for me, is I do think we need to tackle time. That we need to think like, I prioritize some other things beyond me as the teacher being in control of every page of this book, and making sure that every kid in my class gets every single aspect of this novel is less important to me. And so because I believe that, I'll say it's less important, although there's certainly a debate to be had. It's less important than my kids becoming stronger readers. And kids, when they're in a novel for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, they stop often engaging with the text, and instead often they start to go along on the ride that the teacher is laying out for them. It creates a kind of dependence that in many kids, and I know there's exceptions, your classroom might be one of them, but in many kids it creates a kind of dependence where they just show up to class and they're kind of waiting for the teacher to tell them what they're supposed to think. And they know that every part of that book they're going to get support for, the answers for, etc. And I think that that doesn't represent really what reading is. You know, when I had that experience in high school where teachers took me through sort of every page of the book, and then I went to college, and like I was pretty shocked when college, what my professors expected me to do is they gave me a book and they said, by next Thursday, be ready. Have read it. Be ready to talk about it. Be ready to think about it. That kind of independence had literally, that kind of rigor of like reading a book quickly and comprehensively had never been given to me in the 12 years that I had been a student previously, and I drowned. Like I got D's, that first year until I learned how to cope. I think we can do better, and that means that if we teach a whole class novel with our students, if we engage in that work, then we've got to make sure that we are cutting the time down that we're using to teach, and that can be quite painful, because what it means is we're going to look at this book and we're going to say, which parts of this book do I absolutely, like, I need to be with my kids for this chapter. Like, they need it, I need it, this is a huge chapter, huge things happen, or it's beautiful and it breaks my heart, opens my heart. We have to have a communal experience here, because that's sort of the point of this anyway. And which are the chapters, which are the sections that it is important that they're read, and there's things that happen there that need to be brought out, but I'm going to let go of the control a bit, and I'm going to offer my kids independent reading for that time, either in school or at home. When we do this, when we kind of go through our book, I'll show you an example in a moment. When we go through our novel and kind of break it down to like what parts need to be done with kids versus what parts can be done, there it is, which parts can be done more independently. We can move through it faster, and ironically or unexpectedly, one of the effects that has had is that I found that the kids engage more with the book, knowing that they're going to be in it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks as opposed to 8 or 10 or 6. One example here of a broken down novel into time is, this is a pacing chart for Fahrenheit 451. And so what we did is we thought, okay, there's going to be a few different modes of encountering this text. Sometimes we're going to do it as a classic read aloud, where I'm reading aloud, or kids are reading aloud, and we're stopping and working with the text as we go. And probably when that happens in a class period, we can get through about 10 pages or so. Sometimes I'm going to use also sort of classic Reader's Workshop structure, where I'm going to teach a mini lesson. I'm going to teach a strategy for how to do our skills focus. And then the kids are going to read on their own in class. And if they have like 25 minutes to read, 30 minutes to read, usually they can get through around 15 pages or so. And sometimes they're going to read for homework. And they will read 10 to 15 pages, something like that, at home as well. And pacing out the novel in that way, Fahrenheit 451 doesn't have chapters inconveniently. But if you count out the pages, even with some activities, and one of the things that I highlight in the work that I've been doing is that one of the reasons why I'm teaching a whole class novel is because I really believe in the communal aspect of being in a text together, of talking about it, living in it, breathing in it for a chunk of time. And sometimes the things that engage kids to that book are those activity things we have, right? Like, I'll never forget growing up in elementary school. I think we were in The Outsiders, and our teacher did that thing where you do the blue-eyed kids and the brown-eyed kids, and you give kids different privileges and less privileges, and you look at what happens. She was doing that in relation to the book, but that work like changed my mentality about the world. So we want space for that. So even with some activities, some days that don't have to do necessarily with your skills focus, Fahrenheit 451 can take about 12 days to move through. And I think that's important for a sense of urgency and for a sense of clarity in my instruction. What am I doing in this book? How are we thinking about becoming better as readers? Another reason why we want to go through the book relatively quickly is because I believe wholeheartedly that this work hinges on the question of what are my students able to do on their own now that they've been with me. And that's true if I teach a lesson and I ask them to apply it. What matters is what they took from that lesson, not what I did, right? And so in this work, if I've chosen a skills focus, like interpreting themes, and I've chosen a novel that I think will interest my kids and challenge them and give them an interesting perspective on the world and identity, like maybe that's Fahrenheit 451. The third thing that I've got to get in place is that they, as soon as we're done with this novel, take what they've learned and apply it to a text that hopefully they've chosen and that they can read with strength. And so the other thing I suggest, if you are in whole class novels and are looking to change them, or if you're looking to adopt a whole class novel into your practice, is that you plan your units in, say, 6-week chunk times. And 3 of those weeks or so is in the whole class text. 2 of those weeks are in the whole class text. And then you move right into a book club study of books that are related to your whole class novel. And that what you're asking kids to do is to apply the same strategies that you've taught them in your whole class novel for your skills focus. But now they're going to apply it to a book that they've chosen, that they get to read with peers and talk about, and that they can read with strength or that challenges them if the whole class text was easy. And this transfer piece is a big focus. The last thing I'll end with is that in order to make this work, if this is sort of the framework of what we're thinking about, that we have a skills focus, we have strategies for that skill, we choose a book thoughtfully, we teach it quickly, and then we get into book clubs. That of course I'm going to have to think of ways to make sure that all my kids can access the text and feel supported along the way. So the other way that Reading Workshop can influence a whole class novel study is that I'm still going to be doing conferences in small groups each step of the way. And that particularly in the whole class novel part of the unit, I know there are kids who are going to struggle with that text. And that means that I'm going to have to meet with those kids at least once a week and give them strategies, not tell them the answer, not give them the audiobook, but give them strategies for what do I do when a book is too hard. Like when I got to college and picked up Ulysses and I couldn't get through the clause of Ulysses, I had to figure out what the heck to do. How can we give our kids those strategies early so they can practice it? All right, this isn't crazy hard. It's not Ulysses. It's I don't know, The Outsiders. But you're still going to have to do things like reread and summarize, like get a buddy, like research the context of the book. There are things you're going to have to do because this book is challenging that you can practice. And what I've found is that kids can have, it's hard, but kids can have the motivation to do it, partly because what I'm telling them is not, you're going to have to do this every day of your schooling, kid. Sorry, you're going to have to work harder than everyone else because this book is hard. But instead I'm saying, hey, for these 2 weeks, you're going to have to practice this because it's a tough text. And then you're going to get a book that you can read with strength, and you're going to have to practice the same stuff. And without that support, and the opposite is true too, obviously, the kids who are breezing through and barely working and getting everything right and being brilliant all the time, we want to make sure that we meet with those kids too and offer them enriching work that can help push their thinking. And that the middle clump of kids for whom this is perfect for, we're giving them all other work as well. So to wrap up here in a couple minutes, if you're sitting here and you're like, I do Reader's Workshop and I have no interest in doing a whole class novel, I want you to know that, yay. My message is not saying that you should leave the world of choice. You should leave the world. If you have that going in your classroom, I believe, I'm biased, but I believe that is the idea, that kids are choosing books, that they are being taught skills and strategies, and they're becoming more independent and powerful. But if either you're in a Reader's Workshop class and you are craving for a variety of reasons that whole class novel experience, or if you teach whole class texts and it is not going the way that you dream of for your students, that it's not igniting a fire in your kids for reading, that it's not making them better as readers, that I think that's a question that's worth us as a profession struggling with, as opposed to what's sort of happened over time, which is we just sort of keep those camps separate and don't talk about what can happen in the middle. There are solutions to be had, and it's worth it for our kids. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. We could listen to you all day. Twitter was all over. Everyone was listening. I think so many of us really appreciated you sharing your journey. I think in teaching and learning, a lot of us don't take that time to take a step back and look at how we've arrived where we are. And I think honoring that journey is really helpful to so many teachers, because I think many people, elementary, middle, high school, feel that community part of the whole class novel, right, is something we do struggle with. So I think you gave people so many great ideas in your framework. First and foremost, we got to look at our kids. We can't forget the kids. I think your ideas around transfer were really important, that every day we have to think, what am I doing and how is this helping them, and can they apply and move on? And that was just, I think, really important. I think thinking about identity in the books that we choose is something we're all thinking so much about. In the morning keynote, I went in my refrigerator, found things I never noticed before either. So it is really humbling to think about the work that we have cut out in front of us and making sure that that's happening. So I think your framework is really applicable to all grade levels, which is interesting to me because I think elementary, but I was taking so many notes because I think it was applicable everywhere. Is how do we keep engagement and identity and choice alive and still find that time for whole class novels, because some of those conversations are really important to have together to think about.
I meant to say, which I am always really bad at, obviously this is 45 minutes, just blah, but this is work that is culminating in a book that's coming out through Heinemann in February. And I think the working title, I think I'm allowed to say it, although I'm getting in trouble, you guys will support me anyway. I think we're calling it a novel approach, whole class novels, student-centered teaching and choice. So
really needed.
Is something interesting or exciting, know that there's more support in the book, but that I'll be doing blog posts and videos and stuff like that to help us just work on this together.
Oh, so exciting. It's going to be great. We can't wait. So up next, I'm going to do a little screen share here. In session 2, we have about a 15-minute break to get up and get some food and do what you need. And come back for session 2. Will be from 12 to 12:45. There's a session with Jillian Hayes and Teresa Brunner looking at White Now What? Making a place for conversations around race in schools. Maggie Roberts will be thinking about and sharing her thoughts on being your favorite teacher, exploring the art of great teaching. And Stephanie Finito, Heidi Weber, Kathy Meir, and Suzanne Parath will be talking about building a virtual learning network for professional learning. So great options. We hope people take a break, come back. In the meantime, also consider contributing today to one of the charities that have been highlighted. Think about the amount we're learning together and find a way to pay that EduJoy forward. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kate.